Parliament Hill is reeling from yet another shocking allegation leveled against a sitting member of Parliament. Global News reported last evening, citing two unnamed sources, that Liberal MP Han Dong secretly advised a Chinese diplomat to delay the release of Canadians Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. Just hours later, Han Dong rose in the House of Commons.
Let me be clear. What has been reported is false, and I will defend myself against these absolutely untrue claims.
Dong also informed the House that he will sit as an independent MP. Opposition MPs are outraged.
On what date did the Prime Minister find out the revelations that one of his MPs may have helped keep our people in jail?
We will never accept any form of premise that this government and Canadians didn't work enough to bring them back home.
Enough is enough. Every day new allegations come forward about political interference that erode the public's trust in our democracy. Communities are at risk of being stigmatized. We need to clear the air.
So after a question period, opposition parties voted together to pass a non-binding NDP motion calling on the Liberal government to launch a public inquiry. Han Dong voted for that motion. How is the government going to respond to all of this? We're going to bring in the power panel now to break it all down. Vandana Cotter is a political consultant and a former advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Dimitri Soudis is a former director of communications to Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Andrew Thompson is a former Saskatchewan NDP finance minister, now chief of government relations at the University of Toronto, and the CBC's Jason Markisoft. Thanks, gang. It's a big news day. Thank you so much for joining us. Vandana, start with you. Han Dong denies the allegations against him, but he told Global News that he did talk to the Consul General in 2021, not about Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, and the Prime Minister's office did not know about the discussion until these stories came out or they were contacted about the stories. How do you think the Prime Minister's office should have reacted to that when they got the call? Are they handling this properly?
I think so. I think they have allowed Han Dong to take this opportunity to be independent. I think that was the right decision to do. And I think they've said what they've had to say on Han Dong when the accusations first came about. I think him stepping aside is the right decision to make and allows him to be off focus and the government to continue with the job at hand.
Dimitri, when we saw a similar allegation with Vincent Ke at Queen's Park, he stepped aside right away from Doug Ford's caucus. How do you think Stephen Harper would have handled this if something like this happened when he was Prime Minister?
Well, it's hard to look back and say how would have. You know, it's always easy to be the Monday morning quarterback. What I'm seeing in Ottawa right now is this is a template case study as to how not to handle a crisis in the political world. You know, we've been seized with this issue for the last couple of months. And the challenge with the Prime Minister, and I'm truly not being partisan when I'm analyzing this, is he started off by almost denying and saying there's really no issue here. Then he moved into a mode of minimizing it. And then he finally said enough is enough. Political interference is a serious problem in this country. So I'm going to appoint somebody to tell me what to do. And essentially it's what he did by appointing former Governor General David Johnston. You know, Mr. Dong, beyond just saying I will quit Liberal caucus, because he deserves due process. Let's be clear. He ended up leaving the government caucus over a story that aired last night with unnamed sources. He should be demanding due process. He should be demanding that whatever has been said against him or whatever evidence there is against him be made public. And furthermore to that, again, to go back to the Prime Minister's office, and I don't want to be the Monday morning quarterback, but the first thing I would have done last night when that Global News story aired, I would have called the clerk of the Privy Council and I would have said, dinner is cancelled tonight. We need to have a meeting. You need to bring the National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister. You need to bring in the head of CSIS because the Prime Minister wants to be briefed on exactly what it is that is alleged against a member of Parliament, regardless of whether that member of Parliament is a member of the government caucus or not. And to add to this craziness, I don't know how Mr. Dong, if it is true, how he thought that asking the Chinese government to delay the release of these two Canadians would have benefited the Conservative Party. When hostages are released, The net benefactor is the Prime Minister of Canada because he's seen as playing a leadership role.
Yeah, the political calculation, Andrew, in the story, I don't know. I covered the 2019 and 2021 elections. I know there was great anxiety in the Liberals that something bad would happen with Mr. Kovrig and Mr. Spavor, you know, just in general, but more acutely during the election cycle. So I'm not sure how suggesting holding on to them helped the Liberals, because a release would benefit the Conservatives. But, you know, I wasn't part of this conversation. But what do you make of this situation where we're in now, where Han Dong has left the caucus? He says he did nothing to harm Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, and that he's a loyal and innocent Canadian with no way to clear his name.
Well, we're watching a train wreck in slow motion, unfortunately. I mean, there should be nothing that is new to the Prime Minister in terms of the allegations that are being made that he will not have been previously briefed on. To assume that he's not briefed on not only what Mr. Dong is being accused of, but what the other 10 MPs who are supposedly named in the CSIS intelligence papers are being accused of. Now, he will know who those MPs are. He will know whether he is one of those MPs that has been named. And I think what now needs to happen is very quickly, they need to push forward with the Johnson report, make sure that the basic facts are established, put in place a public inquiry that is surrounded by adults, not the kind of foolishness that we were seeing coming out of the committee driven by MPs like Conservative Michael Cooper and that kind of witch hunty stuff that was going on. But actually focus in on what the allegations are, allow these members of Parliament an opportunity to explain why they are implicated or what they know about it, whether it's witting or unwitting engagement on this file, and for them to then clear the air on this. There's no other way for this now to go away. And I think that that's what the problem is. Now, the difficulty is political leaders, and this is true for both the Prime Minister and it appears Premier Ford, who was briefed on the allegations against the MPP in his caucus back in November, is that they have opted to do nothing until it becomes public. And that in itself, I think, is causing its own set of aftershocks.
But does that tell us, Andrew, just quickly, that they've chosen to do nothing until it went public? Is that because they wanted to ignore it as a political problem, or what they were presented with wasn't significant enough or clear enough for them to act? Because Doug Ford said that it was all very vague what they got, and I think it was his staff. But that's what I wonder with this, right?
Well, it could be, but then the responsibility clearly on them has to be, how do they inoculate their government against the allegations that are clearly going to pop up on the front page of the papers or in the news media programming that runs 24/7 now.
Right.
That's part of the political calculation. That's why we have these large political offices sitting around the prime ministers and the premiers, is to make sure that those situations are managed in advance.
So Jason, they've laid out a process, right? Special rapporteur, he's got until May 23rd, David Johnston does, to decide whether or not there will be an inquiry. It just seems like this story and the allegations and the politics is moving way faster than that process. I mean, is it tenable to wait until May 23rd for a decision on how this is going to be investigated?
With every call, it becomes less and less tenable. With every drip revelations, and the clearest pattern in this, beyond the Liberals' habit of trying to minimize, avoid their various tactics, is that there are more revelations, that there are intelligence sources, people from the intelligence community, who have motivations to speak to Sam Cooper of Global and Steve Chase and Robert Fife at Global Mail, who are doing incredible work on this. We also know that, it's about 2 weeks from now, we're going to finally get Katie Telford, the Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Trudeau, to testify, and that will certainly be another inflection point in this, one which the Liberals resisted for a long time. So, yeah, May 23rd seems like an eternity away in this, on this story. And let's also remember that David Johnston was not assigned to cover things outside the scope of the two elections. What Han Dong is accused of doing was not election related, so I'm not even sure if what Prime Minister Trudeau has assigned him to do would even cover this.
Well, actually, if you look at his mandate and point 1, because I have this right next to me, it's required reading for this job. He's asked to assess the extent and impact of foreign interference in Canada's electoral process. And I asked Dominic LeBlanc about this earlier this week, I think it was. You lose track of time in this story. But he said, look, David Johnston can decide how far, how deep, how broad, how wide he wants to go. It's up to him. So they're not restricting him, because I think the New Democrats would have cried bloody murder had they tried to put too big of a fence around it, and it would have maybe jeopardized that agreement. But Vandana, going back to the question I sort of asked Jason, this is moving faster than the special rapporteur process. As well-intentioned as it may have been, it's not moving at the political pace. So, I mean, how long is this waiting until May 23rd a viable political position for the Liberals to hold?
I think that, information is going to evolve as it comes. And we can't jump on partisan or political needs to all of a sudden ask for things. They've already put forward a plan, and that plan is with the special rapporteur. He needs time. This is a big, big thing that Mr. Johnston is taking on. He needs time to look at 2019, 2021, and as you just mentioned with Dominic LeBlanc, all the other pieces as well. Right. That's something, these are decisions that have to be made based on fact. And he needs the time to look at the facts, get all the information it requires to properly advise on this. I understand there's more heat on the government in order to move faster, but I think in order to get the right answer happening, in order to give Mr. Johnson the space he needs to give the proper advice, this is the timeline we have to follow.
But, Dimitri, they have a plan, as Vandana says, but, to quote the great political philosopher Mike Tyson, every fighter has a plan until they get hit in the face. And last night was a real roundhouse to this plan. So, I mean, at what point do they have to deviate from that? Or can they just rough it out? Because that's certainly, toughing it out certainly seems to be their intention right now.
Well, in political communications, it's similar to what Wayne Gretzky used to say. It's not about where the puck is, but figuring out where the puck is going to be. And on this issue, the government has failed, again, respectfully, miserably, in figuring out where this is going. And as Jason mentioned, and I do intend the following pun, this is like Chinese water torture. There will be more stories. Clearly, somebody at CSIS has an axe to grind for unknown reasons and keeps leaking things that are causing daily damage to the government. And think about it. The Prime Minister's office right now, it has clearly become dysfunctional. And we went through similar situations when we were in government where our only focus was crisis management. And unless you are able to look ahead and say, okay, how does this story end and get out ahead of it, you're just going to be literally crippled. Tomorrow, President Biden's going to be here. I guarantee you he's going to get a question by the press gallery as to whether or not he is concerned by Chinese interference in the Canadian democracy. And for the life of me, I truly don't understand why the Prime Minister needed to appoint somebody, anybody, to tell him what to do. This is something that the Prime Minister should be deciding. 20 years ago this month, Jean Chrétien made a decision that Canada would not be going to Iraq. He didn't need to appoint a special envoy or a rapporteur to come back and tell him what to do. So I struggle with the indecisiveness. I also struggle with the fact that the government was resisting for far too long to send the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff to testify. She's testified before. And the point here is, and in defense of the Prime Minister, I used to get regular security briefings. It doesn't mean that the Prime Minister got all the same information because you have to measure what ends up on the Prime Minister's desk. So, Ms. Telford is going to find herself in a peculiar situation. And the only question I'm asking myself, and I think Canadians are asking themselves, is the way that the government is handling this, the only question that begs itself is, what do they have to hide?
Right. So, Andrew, I think there's what ends up on the Prime Minister's desk. I think a big concern, if you're CSIS or an information service right now, it's what's ending up on Sam Cooper's desk, Bob Fife's desk, Steve Chase's desk. I mean, we don't know if CSIS is the source of the leak, but it's a lot of CSIS information certainly on its face. I mean, at what point do the intelligence agencies have to speak out, answer some of this, clear some of this up, go to a parliamentary committee and lay out some clarity on exactly what we're witnessing in our politics right now?
Well, absolutely, that has to happen. There's no doubt that this cannot be only the one side of the story, which is the so-called revelations, which are based in intelligence, which isn't necessarily even actionable intelligence, but is simply, taking stock of what they've heard. The bigger question, I would expect that this is a question that President Biden will be raising to the Prime Minister tomorrow, is how can the Five Eyes trust the Canadian Security Agency to stay quiet? I mean, how can that information be protected? Because what says that they don't now get upset about something that they've learned through an American intelligence network? That leaky sieve of a security agency needs to be brought back into a professional mandate and needs to have proper oversight on it, and it needs to answer the questions, notwithstanding what the material issue is that they've raised. Those need to be addressed, certainly through the parliamentary system that the NDP is pushing for. But the bigger question around how CSIS itself is being monitored is a significant issue.
You know, Jason, we had the initial appearance at committee by some of the national security apparatus when the initial wave of reporting came out, but it feels like it's moved well beyond that now. Certainly in terms of like political heat and pressure and really concern. I mean, what happens now with the heads of these intelligence agencies, do you think?
Well, I think the the extent to which we talk about the untenable situation the Prime Minister and Liberal Party government find themselves in, I think that CSIS and other security organizations are finding themselves in the same one. There will be temptation to them to go public with more things to clear the air. But as to Andrew's point, the security anxiety, the security level anxiety internationally is going to be high, including the fact that there are now reports about phone surveillance of the Chinese consulate. I mean, not a huge surprise. That has happened fairly often, but the extent to which they're concerned, and China's learning a lot through these stories as much as Canadians are through this reporting about what Canadian intelligence is gathering, what they suspect, what they believe, and what they report. We're also certainly going to have CSIS and others be more forthcoming to the private security committee struck by Trudeau and looking into this, and David Johnson. But in terms of that being public stuff, don't expect a whole lot.
You know, Vandana, Dimitri and Andrew and others have made the point that just because it's intelligence that's prepared for the Privy Council office or the Prime Minister's office, it doesn't mean it necessarily makes its way all the way up to the Prime Minister. And this is something we've heard repeatedly in this. Is there a requirement now for the people who run the intelligence agencies, prepare these briefings, to explain some of this in an open forum so that Canadians can understand it, reporters can understand it, and parliamentarians can understand it? Because it's opaque, the world of spycraft, as it probably should be. But it feels like the horse is out of that burn, and that burn is on fire.
Well, yeah, I have a lot of concerns with people going on and telling other people that I've tried to raise this, but I'm sharing this with you. There's systems for a reason. And I actually have a lot of concern with people almost like vigilantes trying to put out information that they feel like that shouldn't have been flagged up. There is a reason it's not flagged up usually. There are many people, talented public servants, who look at this information and help decide along with other people what the PM sees and what he doesn't see. There's a whole country to run. There's many issues. But I do think our public service agencies need to understand and explain what's happening here, because it's not just distrust in the system from the public. People have to understand that they can trust their security systems because their information's with them, they have to feel safe with them, and these leaks don't help.
Right. So, Dimitri, I've never received a CSIS briefing or a CSIS leak, but Corey Tenaik, who you would know well, not exactly a Liberal apologist, he has said in public forums that the briefings and the information he got in the Prime Minister's office from CSIS were very non-specific, they were very vague, and he described them as essentially useless. I don't know if that's a fair characterization or not, but what is your experience from your time in the Prime Minister's office on the quality of the stuff you got from CSIS in terms of whether you could take action on it?
Well, it would be hard for me to disagree. And I remember occasions where I used to get those briefings, and they used to arrive in an envelope or in a cardboard folder. It said "top secret for your eyes only." They only brought paper copies. They took them with them after the briefing, and then I would open it, I would read it, and I would turn to the person briefing me and say, "I just saw that on CNN. How is this for your eyes only, and you bring it in a piece of paper that you can't take back?" Now, having said that, the challenge with, and I share Vandana's point, the Prime Minister does not see everything. If you all remember Paul Martin, the day after the Auditor General report, he came out and said, "I knew nothing of all of this." So on one hand, you come across as a liar, or on the other hand, you come across as incompetent. So the challenge, because politics is perception at the end of the day, and when perception starts to settle in, and Ms. Telford is going to have to answer a lot of these questions on what did she know, and of what she got briefed on, what did she brief the Prime Minister on? Another point that I'll make is, and again, I feel bad because I like her, the Clerk of the Privy Council should also come to committee and ask some questions. The two people that ultimately have full access to the Prime Minister in a way that nobody else does, including ministers, are the Clerk of the Privy Council and the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff. So it's almost you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. If the Prime Minister chooses to say, "I didn't know," well, then he's incompetent or a liar. Or if he wasn't briefed on it, then the government becomes incompetent because they didn't act on it. So Unfortunately, the reality of politics is that perception dominates reality.